So it's So it's lesson 6. So this week we're gonna keep working with our little video game application. The way we left it off last week was we had it connected up to MongoDB, and I think we first connected locally and then I connected it to MLab. I think I'm gonna use it just running with MLab because that way I don't have to bother starting my local instance of MongoDB to get it running. So today what we're gonna do is add the functionality for adding, editing, and deleting games. So by the end of class today, we want to be able to do all those things, have kind of a full CRUD application built out. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I am going to go and grab my lesson 5 folder. Actually, I already did make a copy of it to lesson 6. If you're running, who in here is going to run MongoDB locally as opposed to using MLab? Is there anybody who's going to use their local database? If there is, I'll review the process of how to kick it off, but if everyone's connecting to MLab, we can skip that. So you can open up your lesson 6 in your code editor. If you grab my repository, I don't think many of you should need to. Everybody was here last week. So if you need mine, you'll have to keep in mind it's got my credentials without my password in the config file. So you need to change the database configuration to use your own MLab database. Right, so I took my password out, which I found somewhere. I stored in a text document on my machine, just like Jacob did, because I've already forgotten what my password was last week. So I'm just going to turn off my screen share for just a second. And go and grab my password. Which I will replace in my config/globals. So now I should be able to open a command prompt and just use NodeMon to get it running, and it should basically be in the same state we left off with last week. So I'll open up command prompt, browse into my lesson 6 folder. If I use NodeMon, hopefully my app will run and should connect to my MLab database. So it's telling us we're running, which is okay. So my password is wrong. Just double check my password here. And make sure I put it in correctly. That's interesting. That should be the correct password.
That's COMP2106.
Thank you. Wrong database. Oh, because I'm messing with the wrong file because I didn't open up. This is my project from this morning. Thank you. Doing the same lesson twice in one day. No, well, I mean, it's good because I get to you guys get the better version because all the mistakes I make in the morning and all the questions they ask me that I don't know the answers to, I now know those things. I just confuse myself. It's not boring. So I was working in the wrong project. Thank you, Margot, for that. There. So now I can do my screen share again. And I think my app should run okay. So now NodeMon restart, says I'm connected to MongoDB. Cool. So we should be able to pull up our site at localhost 3000. So this is how we left off. So we built index, register, and login back in week 4 with the generator. And then we built our kind of main games page last week, where we're doing a find on our MongoDB using Mongoose, and we've got a loop in our index.ejs that displays our data. So where we're going with this, we want to put onto this add, edit, and delete links, and then add the views we need and add the functionality in our books roots, books.js, to be able to do the adding, editing, deleting operations. What we'll start to do next week is then we're going to add authentication. So we'll make those books pages private, and users will have to register and log in order to access them. And then later on, we'll add social media authentication after reading week. So you can use Facebook or GitHub, maybe Google to log in. Okay. So everybody okay to make sure your games page runs? You can connect to MongoDB. I'm also going to just change the text on my homepage. Again, if we're building something that we may actually want to potentially show somebody, maybe we'll kind of change the splash page a bit and put on a bit of an overview of what we're actually doing here. So I'm just going to go to my views. You don't have to do this, but it's just going to make, and underneath views, I'm going to open up index.ejs. So this is not our books, not our games homepage. This is the main site homepage. So I'm going to take this out. I'll maybe stick on a main tag. We'll change the title to maybe say, then I'm just going to put a little paragraph on that kind of explains what technologies we're using. So again, if we're in a job interview and we want to fire this up, give somebody an idea what our little application's all about. Entirely optional. Maybe I'll just put on a section. By no means do you have to add this to yours. By no means, feel free to say anything you like. I want to put a picture of Elmer Fudd on your homepage instead, feel free. So this should, that's probably better. So I've linked to my GitHub. You know, I'm not linking to a specific repository because obviously I keep publishing a new repository every week. Now, to save us a bit of time today, so the first thing we want to do is deal with adding a new game. So on our games page, we're going to want to add a link, just a standard HTML link that says add a new game. And we want that to display a form where somebody can populate values of a new game object. Okay. Now to save time, I pre-built 4 views that we're going to need today. Because they're all just HTML. We'll add a little JavaScript on one of them, but rather than spend time coding all these views, I just put them up on GitHub for you. So what I want you to do, and I'm going to show you where they are, go to my GitHub page, and there's a repository there I want you to download, and I want you to copy those 4 views into our lesson 6 project. Okay. Although 2 of them are going to go in one place and 2 of them are going to go in another place. So just follow along and I'll show you what to do. So if you just go to my main GitHub page and go to my repositories, the top repository is COMP2106, lesson 6, new views. So it's not a full application, it's just 4 EJS files we're going to add. Okay, so click on the repository, click the download button, and I'm actually just gonna, so I'll just open up the zip file. You don't have to download it to your machine. You could just open it up. If you're in Chrome, I don't think you have that option, but Firefox should give you that option to just open it up. So you can save the file or you can just open it, whatever, doesn't matter. So I'll just open it. So I've got the git ignore, which we don't need. So there's 4 views here, 404 an error, as well as a view for adding and a view for editing games. So over here, I'll just open up my lesson 6 directory. So this is our current project on the left. So let's go into, I'll go into views. And inside of games, I want to take add and edit. So I'm going to copy these 2 views into my views/games. Right? So right now we have a games index. We also want an add and an edit form. And I'll explain why we have 2 separate forms for this in a bit. So if you've downloaded the whole file and extracted it, that's fine. Just copy, add, and edit out of the zip file folder you created and paste them into lesson 6 views games. You can see it right here. The 404 and error, where do you think those are going to go? What path do they belong in? Okay, so the root directory, so like right in lesson 6? Yeah, so inside lesson 6 and views, right? The same place that our register login and main homepage that we were just editing. So 404 and error, we'll put them in here. Now, the generator already gave us an error.ejs. We're going to overwrite it because my file has our header and footer and some Bootstrap classes. So you can say, yes, replace the error.ejs that the Express generator built. We use my error template instead. Then you can close the zip file. You can even delete the zip if you downloaded it. We don't need it anymore. So if we look at these, here's what my error page looks like, which of course you're free to change. So I put the header at the top, added a main section with a kind of generic error message. The 404 page is pretty much the same. Okay. In terms of the add and edit, oops, I don't know where my files went. Maybe I never copied them. I thought I did. So I'll do that again. Oh, yeah. Oh, there they are. I just had to refresh. So add and edit right now are identical copies. Okay. So there's no JavaScript. It's just the HTML forms that I wanted to save you the trouble of building. Okay. Now, in our PHP class and in our .NET class, we actually were using the same form for both adding and editing. We can do that with Node, but I find it actually gets a little bit messy. So it's probably, I find our code, our JavaScript code in the back end is cleaner if we have separate pages entirely for add and edit. If you want to try and do it all in one, you can, but you'll have to make some adjustments in terms of the code we write when we save the changes. So I'm going to do add and edit. I'm going to choose to do those as separate forms. So here's add.ejs. We'll start with this one. As I said, there's really nothing here. It's just an HTML form with a bunch of inputs. The only other thing I wanted to do on here, you'll notice there on line 19, there's a blank space. So we have a drop-down list for genre. And for those of you who spend far too much of your time playing video games, I'll allow you to supply the appropriate genres that should be in our drop-down. I'll try not to take too many digs at you, but I can't make promises. So what genres, we need a bunch of option tags in here. We won't feed them from the database. We'll just hard code them in. Okay, so let's put in a few. And then we'll reorder them. So we'll put them in alphabetical order. Okay, so we'll have simulation. Actually, I guess we can just do it this way. Well, we've got RPG and openware, so we probably should include those as options for adding a game. I don't know, I just work here. You're speaking another language. Open world? Great. Well, when we do editing later, I'll fix that. We may as well put them in order. Is that good enough? So we can just go with those three options. Okay. So we've got the view. Let's create a link now on our index page that will try to load this view when a user clicks add a new game. So I just added lines 19 through 21. I didn't want to do that without everyone's permission and blessing here. Since apparently I don't know the difference between open world and open whatever the hell I called it last week. Okay. You don't. If you don't specify a value, it uses the text as the value. So now let's open in games. Let's open up index.ejs. So this was the page we built last week that displays the games for MongoDB. So underneath our H1 tag, let's put in a link. Now our link is going to say add a new game. What do you think our href should be? Where do we want to link to? Keep in mind the URLs in Node and Express, they don't work the same way as they do in HTML, PHP. So what would be a good descriptive URL? Remember, we don't have to name a particular view. We're just setting out a URL. So this page is book/index, right? Sorry, games. So it goes /games takes us here. So if we're going to have a link that says add a new game, so I'll just save that. If I reload games for a second, where should this link go, do you think? What would be a good descriptive URL? Yeah, I like Asim's suggestion. This will go to /games/add. Because by starting it with /games, we know it's handled by our games router. And then we'll look for a path in there called /add. So remember, we have full control over our URLs because the URLs don't have to match the name of any particular file or view. So let's send it to /games/add. So now, notice our error page kicked in, which is good. Right? Why are we getting the error page? We have a view. Yeah, because we haven't done anything in the route. We haven't told Express that this URL is supposed to load games add EJS. So we have the view and we have the URL, but they're not connected yet. Right? Remember, on an Apache server with PHP, this happens automatically. Put a page up, create a link to that page, and it works. But in Express, we manually have to map any URL to whatever page is supposed to call. So where are we going to do that? So that rather than getting this, we get our, like right now, there's no way to see that add.ejs. You cannot load it. So where do we go to connect them up? To point this URL. Yeah, so we're going to go to our games controller or our games router. So inside of routes and games.js, right? So we already have one route mapped, which is the /. So this is what loads our games index view. So we need a second GET request. So we want to show our empty form. So what method of the router do we want? Yeah, we're doing another GET request. And then we have our Express callback function, which is probably starting to become familiar. You did it in your lab, you did it in your portfolio. So the idea that every Express route takes a callback with request response and next. Something we've done a fair bit now. So inside of this method, when we have a GET request at /games/add, what do we do to display that view that we just downloaded from GitHub? Yeah, we're going to call res.render games/add. We don't need the EJS extension because our app.js is already configured. It already knows that all our views will have EJS extensions. So the extension is unnecessary. So load this file here. Inside of views, games, a file called add. So with that little function, we should now be able to click our add a new game link, and it should display the blank form to us. There we go. So loading a blank form is pretty easy. Create the form, set up a GET request, figure out what URL you want to call that form, and call res.render, load the page. What'll happen here if I complete the form, I use the HTML5. I use some HTML5 validators. I already put that stuff in about what's required and stuff. What'll happen here? What happens when you try to submit the form? Why? So we got an error here. Now we don't really know why. But here's our clue. So what happens? So look at this. So get games gives an HTTP response of 304. What does 304 indicate? Not modified. So basically it's been loaded from cache because I've loaded the form a couple times. So my GET request returns 304, and that worked, right? We saw the form. Yet when I submitted it, here's my submission. So when I did a post, I got a 404. So our GET request worked, but our post request threw a page not found. How come? Right, we've told the server what to do with a GET request at this URL, but we haven't set up any instruction if the HTTP method is action page, and we posted from one form to another page. In ASP.NET, our forms just posted to themselves, and we checked if there was a post back. Node works the same way. We can post to another page, but we really don't need to. We can have a router GET for showing the form, and then a router POST to process the form. That's easier. So in order to get around that 404 page, we now need to write our first POST handler. So now we're going to use router.post. Our callback. So our 404 error will go away now because we're telling Express what to do at this URL if the HTTP method is post. So we want to do a few things in here. What should happen when the form gets posted? So someone's filled it out, click the submit button. What do we want to do? Yeah, so we want to write to the database. We want to create a new game document in MongoDB. And then what do we want to do? Yeah, let's redirect them back to our main page, and we should see the new game. So how are we going to, if we take a look at what we did last week for fetching the list of current games, how can we use some of what we did here? This stuff should be a clue as to how we do the save. Right, so game, remember, game is an instance of our game model that we created. So here's our model. Game. So here's our game class, but our game class is based on what? What's kind of like the parent? Our game is a child that inherits from Mongoose, and Mongoose has a find method we were able to call. So yeah, Mongoose probably has some other method that we can use for adding a new record. Obviously, find runs a query. So let's have a look and see if we go to Mongoose and have a look at their API docs. Maybe that's in here. Let's see. Okay, well, so here we go. Documents are integer models. Creating them and saving is easy. We can either call the save method, or we can call the create method. Both of these are going to allow us to save. So Chad, you're absolutely right. We'll use our reference to our game model because game model is based on Mongoose. Mongoose has built-in functions called create and save, just like it has a built-in function called find that we used last week. So we'll use our game model, add a new game document to MongoDB. So last week we called game.find. Now we can call game.create. And create takes as a parameter a JSON object where we can pass in the values we want for this particular game. So this is pretty simple. And the syntax is really nice and clean. Looks like this. So here's our model, right? So our values are title, developer, genre, and year. So our title, in order to get it from our form, we can use request.body.title. So this is like the PHP equivalent of $post title. The request body contains our form. Our developer and because we've got an input with the name of developer, WebStorm recognizes that, right? It comes up in my code in my context menu. And it turns purple and bold because WebStorm recognizes this as a valid variable. If I change that to a capital D, notice that font changes from purple to black and the bolding goes away. If I mouse over it and it actually underlines it in gray, it's giving me a hint that that doesn't exist. So that's likely to crash because I'm trying to reference an input with a name that doesn't exist. And then let's fill the other two values the same way, genre. Now, this ability to read form posts, let me show you where that comes from. When we use the express generator for a site, the sixth dependency that it installs is called body parser. So body parser is an NPM package. So when you use the express generator, one of the dependencies is body parser. So it's required here, and then it's enabled here. So this is what allows us to process and read form submissions. If we take that out, our request.body.whatever input is going to throw an error because it's not recognized. But the generator assumes if we auto build a site, there's a good chance we're going to want forms on there somewhere. So it includes that. So we're going to call create, and then after my JSON object, going to put in a comma here. So this is where our first parameter is this whole JSON object, right? So here is the game we're passing to Mongoose, so Mongoose can dump that into MongoDB. And now we're going to check. We need a callback that will tell us if we got an error or not. We don't really need to get any data back. We just want to know if we have an error. Because as someone said, if we don't get an error, we're just going to redirect. So in here, in our callback, we'll check. If we have an error, let's log it to the console. The console will print the description of what's wrong. What should we do in the browser if this fails somehow? We could output the error. Do we typically want to show the error messages to our users? Yeah, let's call res.render. There's our error view that we downloaded from GitHub, right? Our generic error page that has our header and footer. And then we can just call return. So get out of this function, don't do anything else. We got an error, so we'll log it, take you to the error page, and we can stop. If there is no error, none of this code happens, right? This all gets skipped if our document is actually saved to MongoDB. So if none of this happens, how do we take them back to the updated list of games? Okay, now we could do a res.render on the games view. That would take us to that page, but there's one problem. What will the problem be if we just try to load games index now? Right. Look what we're doing before when we render the games. What does that games view need? What are we passing to it here? Yeah, before we load that view, we're querying to go get all the games and passing it. So what we could do instead of explicitly just calling the view is we can do a redirect. And then our get function will run, which will run the query and then call the view. So doing a redirect is probably more efficient. So we'll just call res.redirect. Much like in C#, there's a response.redirect method. So we just want to redirect /games. That will call the get method we wrote last week, which will show an updated list on our games index. So we shouldn't really need multiple methods all loading the same view. We really only need one method that loads that view, and whenever we want it, we can just redirect to that URL path. Well, let's try it out. Okay. Who's been gaming today? Don't lie to me. It's at least half of you. What have you played today that we're adding to MongoDB? Solitaire? Wow. Live on the edge, Jacob. Developer? Okay. Yep. Genre? We'll go with simulation. How old is Solitaire the game? I think I set a minimum. Yeah, I set the minimum as 1600. That's probably 1601. Okay.
1970 though.
All right. So let's see if this saves and redirects and whether this document actually gets added to MongoDB. We'll try it out. Cool. All right, so it redirected. And when we call the get, it runs our query, fetches the new fresh set of data, loads the view, and hands the current data set off. Right? So now if we check our log here, we can see that this time post ran with the 302. What does the 302 status code mean? Yeah, 302 is a redirect, because after post, we did a redirect, and then we have a get, which is 200, which is successful. So here's all the code in our, actually, there's all the code we've written today in the controller. So there's our get at the top, and there's our post at the bottom. We don't even need to, okay? Because watch what happens. I'm going to change my view for a minute. So let me take out the required here, just for fun on the title, okay? So I should now be able to put in a game, and there's no HTML5, nothing in HTML5 forcing me to add a title. So let me try and add another one. So I'm going to leave title blank. Now, why do we get the error? You got it. So our model says title is required. So we can use HTML5 to validate on the front end, but our model will enforce all our validation rules on the back end, right? Because someone could also use a tool like Fiddler to try and send an HTTP post to our URL without going through our form. So now if we check in here, right, we can see in the log that we got a validation error with our message, title is required, which is the message we set in our model. So our model will enforce the rules as well as we also should be using HTML5 on the front end, but the model will enforce them on the back end. And this is going to work. The model is going to work for both adding and editing. So if we try and edit one and we take out the title and try and save, that same validation rule will run. So there's no need to do additional validation. HTML5 in your views, and then any other additional rules or logic, also put it in your model.
Another question.
Yep.
Is there any way to ensure that the data is coming from your server, so they're not, like you said, they're not using something to send like thousands of contacts, other than like, I guess you could use capture or something. But
It's difficult. Well, you can't use, yes, you could try and use CAPTCHA. It's challenging. You may be able to capture the IP, like the IP address of the, yeah, it's possible, but I mean, that's how cross-site scripting attacks generally work, right? Exactly like this, that one site is submitting data to another one. And there's that other site doesn't have sufficient validation around those requests. So you can perhaps start to see how this all sort of fits together. Does anybody have questions about our post function here and what's happening? our next step with this, add is done. There's really nothing else we have to do. We know the validation works, both on the front end and on the back end. We know we can save, and our redirection is taking us back to the proper page. Pardon me. So our next step, which is going to be even easier, is to add delete functionality. So we're going to take a break. When we come back, what we're going to do is we'll add a column here that maybe says actions, kind of like our ASP.NET MVC Razor views did when we scaffolded them. And we'll put on edit and delete buttons. We'll deal with delete first. So delete is going to be pretty simple here. If we have a game.create, you can probably surmise the method, the Mongoose method we're going to use for doing delete, which would be what? What method will we use for doing deletions? If we've got game.create, we'll use game.remove. And we'll pass in the ID, and Mongoose will get rid of it, and then we'll again do a redirect. We don't even need another page for delete, actually. We just have a get handler and redirect. Delete it from the database and then reload this page. So we'll do delete, and we'll add also we'll add our jQuery confirmation to it, and then we'll add the ability to edit and update with our edit.ejs. So we'll do all that. We'll kind of start on delete in the next hour. That shouldn't take us all hour. I would say 20 minutes, 25 minutes, plenty of time to get our delete feature to work. So let's take a pause here.